Thank you for staying with us. As the world grapples with the consequences of climate change, the need for transparency and accountability in corporate sustainability practices have become increasingly pressing. Experts say the shift towards greater transparency is not only imperative, but also a business necessity, as investors and consumers increasingly demand that companies prioritize sustainability and mitigate their climate risk. Well, for more on this perspective, I'm being joined by the founder of Rubicola Consulting and the immediate past global president of the Association of Certified Chartered Accountants, that's AACCA, Mr. Joseph Owolabi. Thank you so much, Mr. Owolabi. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you after so many years.
After so many years, yes. Mr. Joseph he has offices in Nigeria and Australia and, of course, Germany and Canada. Well, that's really great. Rubicola is the first company to be certified by Climate Bond Initiative as verifier for green bond issuances in Africa. So that when he starts talking, you should know why we have him here to speak around this. Good afternoon again, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to start this conversation by saying, why do you think Nigerian companies need to pay attention to climate change and sustainability issues?
So that's a very interesting one, because critics will say that we're not a big emitter. So if you look at the over 53 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases that are emitted globally, Nigeria just emits about 0.25, right? And African countries only emit just a fraction of that. However, there are opportunities for us to tap into this new wave. Some of the triggers of the sustainable development in this era, obviously you talk about artificial intelligence, but sustainability is one of them, right? Governments around the world, corporate sector, banks, and institutions now know there's overwhelming evidence that climate change is an existential risk. And so we need to focus on that. For a country as Nigeria, over 200 million people, right, that requires opportunities for our booming, millennia and Gen Z generation. Definitely, we need to start focusing on these areas because there are also opportunities and it's not only risk.
That's a good way to start. Now, how do we now help organizations in achieving compliance to all of this?
Definitely. First thing to do is, obviously, governments have shown that leadership. So 195 heads of states and prime ministers around the world during the time of President Obama did sign the Paris Agreement. Yeah, and that set the tone. Of course, there were many other frameworks before that, the Kyoto Agreement and all of that. However, that's the one that is, it's been focused on with overarching goals that spells out what every country needs to do in terms of their national determined contribution. The gap there is that private sector needs to be part of that conversation. And that's where Nigeria comes in. Okay, so most of our banks in Nigeria, they're very big banks across Africa, and they're also listed on global exchanges. Definitely, as part of that, attracting foreign direct investment into Nigeria, there's a need to focus on ESG metrics, environmental, social, and governance. And so for us to be able to communicate this to investors, investors need timely information. The challenge with financial information is that more often than not, it looks at historic events. However, investors need timely, current events to be able to forecast the future. And ESG provides some of that requirements that investors need.
I see that. Let's look at that event because I saw it in the write-up. That's on the 26th of June, 2023. Yeah, where NGX, and I covered that event with the FRC, the new man there, a friend of the house, Rabi Olowo.
Correct.
So I know a bit about this. But tell us about these standards, what they really mean, and how this will help attract the investment we're talking about.
Correct. So Nigeria is not new to Nigeria, right? We've got the Nigerian Banking Sustainable Principles.
Yeah.
We have the Nigerian Exchange, which is now NGX, also have their own corporate governance codes and many other codes across the country. However, globally, the IFRS Foundation, which is that body that is in charge of setting financial reporting standards from as far back as 1973, over 50 years ago, now have moved into the terrain of sustainability reporting. So they've now set up a separate board called the ISSB, International Sustainability Standards Board. They have the remit to set sustainability standards. And so they've set two first set of standards, IFRS S1, which focuses on general requirements for sustainability, and S2, which focuses on climate-related issues. And these standards are for all organizations around the globe. So Nigeria has shown that leadership, one of the first countries in Africa to say, put their hands up and say, we'll go with this. We want to be the center. We want to be the hub of, foreign direct investment. We want to be that place where investors want to put their capital. Definitely, we need to show that intent to be transparent with our financial reporting. Obviously, you mentioned FRCN, Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, led by Dr. Rabi Olowo. But more importantly, the exchange also, the NGX has also shown that leadership to want to rally around entities in Nigeria to be that particular center for transparent financial information.
So there is this aspect of it that has to do with partnership and capacity building.
Yes.
Now you're coming into this. Tell us more about what Rubicola is doing with the NGX and, of course, ACCA.
So Rubicola has been at the forefront of this. You mentioned we're the first
I saw
in
that.
Africa.
That's quite commendable.
Yeah, thank you. To be approved as verifier for CBI. And CBI is that entity that has an ambition to raise over $100 trillion for climate action. And so we've been working with CBI, listing the first sovereign green bond here as far back as 2016, but across the continent to empower organizations, attract financing. More importantly, the FRCN has set out a roadmap whereby it wants Nigerian entities to implement this standard. So early adopters would start from this year, which apparently is the same time the standard becomes effective all over the world, but entities would have up to 2028 to implement the standard. And a critical part of the FRCN's roadmap is capacity building, because this is so different from what accountants are accustomed to. And this is not just accountants. Unlike financial report, where it's finance people and accountants, with sustainability disclosures, you're going to need legal, lawyers are going to be involved, investment bankers, internal auditors, sustainability experts, strategy, CEOs, board members should be across what are going to be the issues around climate scenario analysis. How do we develop a transition plan? Because the business model will need to change, right? So you talked about, railway, travel, and some of that needs to change because it's largely driven by fossil fuel and diesel. How do we make that electric? Dangote refinery is on, but we know the world all over is moving away from that. How do we develop a transition plan? Even if we don't leave all of that right now, how do we develop a 20, 30-year goal to move from where we are now, fossil fuel dependent, to more renewable driven? Last year, globally, 30% of the energy supplies was from solar alone. So it tells you how much increase in uptake is happening around the world. So government needs to be involved by providing incentives. It's very expensive to buy an electric vehicle.
That's true.
Very expensive to install solar panels in your home. And that's where you need government. Beyond setting policy, which is important, setting direction, they also need to provide incentives. Like all over the world, in France, in the UK, in Australia, where I live, government is putting their money where their mouth is and enabling this change towards renewable.
So you are going to put this together. We have CEOs, you have CFOs. What are you going to be telling them?
Come on, we're inviting everybody across this great country of Nigeria. And we've done this around the world, in North America, in Europe, just recently in East Africa, in Kigali, twice already in 2 months. And we're bringing this to Nigeria, and I'm so excited. And that's why we're partnering with the Nigerian exchange, NGX regulation, because they have the remit. They've got all these listed entities. But it's not just for listed entities, it's also for private entities. ESG is here to stay. And we're going to be meeting on the 25th of June. CEOs, board members, strategy leaders, finance professionals, risk, health and safety, legal professionals. We want to bring them into an immersion program. It's not just a workshop. It's not a webinar. It's not a training. It's an immersion. You're going to look at what are the class actions that are coming world over for the likes of JP Morgan. They are being sued around the world by individuals, by corporates, in terms of greenwashing, saying things that you're not doing and you're putting in your financial statement would hurt you this time around. And so I'm inviting everybody again. Please come. Be part of that at the Oriental Hotels on Tuesday, 25th of June. And we're going to learn from each other, but more importantly, focus on material issues. For us in Africa, I mentioned earlier, it's not the emissions, it's the social issue. How do we ensure that women are part of the conversation? How do we ensure that women can rise up to the top, like we have in your organization? How do we ensure that on the boards, it's not just old men, young people can have a voice, can bring their expertise. We've seen the president of Nigeria show that direction recently with the appointment to the National Climate Action Council to bring young people. The DG there now is a young woman, 39, the other young man, 44. And that's what young people want to see. In a country of over 60% youth, they want to see participation. And that's one of the things we'll be discussing. Diversity, inclusion, social inclusion, and governance. Very much important, not just the environmental issues.
That sounds interesting. I need to try to attend this.
You should.
but let's look at this transition that you're talking about generally now. I am worried looking at where we find ourselves. We're just taking our subsidy. We see what's happening. We're trying to move to CNG, cleaner energy, and all of this. But my question really would be, you've gone around the world. How prepared are countries to take advantage of all of the positives around climate change?
The good news is that nobody is prepared. And I can tell you that, from Australia is a top 15 economy by GDP, and I've been to places like the US, same thing in the US, and Canada is just thinking about their own standards. And so these challenges can be daunting. But having worked with CEOs here and boards here, I know Nigerian companies want to lead that change. And it's good to have that leadership, not just from corporate sector, as we've seen also the FRCN coming forward to say we want to go with this and want to go there timely. So the good thing is Africa generally missed out on the previous industrial revolution, first, second. The fourth industrial revolution is on the way, and it's digital. Look at how your operations here have changed over the years from what it used to be to digital platforms and all of that, and the channels. Yes. So also we need to think about how do we enable sustainability in all of this consideration. When you think about things like blockchain and all of that, how do we make sure they are energy efficient? If you think about your studio, how do we look at of ways of doing things that will be cost friendly, but more importantly, things of the next generation without undermining the resources we have. You've seen floods all over Lagos. You've seen buildings being destroyed. Construction needs to take account of sustainable construction and sustainable building. How do we minimize this energy? And that's the conversation we need to have. For us in Nigeria, when we talk about transition, it's about having a plan, a strategic plan for the board, for senior executives to say, this is where we are now. And you need to do a gap analysis to say, this is where we are. How do we look at our business model, look at our supply chain, look at everything we do from our value chain to ensure that the business can continue to exist in a sustainable way. And that's the whole thing about sustainability and ESG.
So interesting conversation, I must tell you. But what's the outlook for you? Generally, we'd like to have a projection. Okay, let's say in the short, medium, and long term with regards to climate change and all that surrounds it.
I think for me, everybody understands the risk of climate change. I think we now get the risk. We've seen the floods, we've seen the earthquakes. We've heard about them. We've heard about how 2 billion animals died in Australia and all of the bushfires in California and the droughts in South Africa. Everybody knows about the risk. The challenge is how do we articulate the opportunities? I think if you're a board, if you're the director on a company, if you're a CEO, you want the opportunities. How do we position our organization to win? I'll give you a good example, local example. Years ago, Total in this country started looking at a strategy and thinking about, rather than being known as an oil and gas, focusing more on gas, because they know that gas would be needed and it's not as dirty as other fossil fuel. So it's that simple. If you're Dangote refinery, definitely we need the energy, but you know that in 50 years, as we've seen in the Gulf, Aramco, listing and diversifying all of that, extracting some of that value, we will start to see that more entities will start focusing on renewables. We've seen that not just with Shell, and Total. We've seen that across the world. How do we start thinking about our business model? And that's what the standard requires. So IFRS S1 requires that you look at your strategy. You look at your strategic plan and say, what do we need to do? How do we ensure that the impact of climate change, either physical risk, which is the floods, the earthquakes, and the hurricanes, and all of that, and transition risk, the impact of climate change on your business can be curtailed, can be mitigated? How do you come up with new offerings, new opportunities? In Nigeria, it's green bonds. How do we attract more financing to help us harness all of the sunshine we have? If you're having all of these energy challenges, we can develop solar farms. We've seen that in Morocco. We've seen that in places like East Africa and what have you. So it is about the opportunity. And when we're going to be meeting on the 25th of June, I'll be challenging the CEOs in the room, the finance people in the room, investment bankers, risk analysts, to think about what opportunities are you going to bring to the table. If climate change is real and the risks are real, how do you position your business to win? And that's very important.
I wish you so very well. We'll keep a tab on obviously have you in. Even when you're in Australia, we'll definitely have you join the program.
Definitely, I can
talk about climate issues, climate change issues, and of course, financial issues. I will have you join the program. It's really good to see you. I've been speaking to Mr. Joseph Owolabi. He's the founder of Rubicola Consulting, and like I said earlier, immediate past global president. Yes, Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, ACCA. Thank you for joining the program. I wish you a great weekend. Let me get a handshake. All right, then. Enjoy your weekend. All right, then. Thank you. All right, let's take another break. When we come back, we'll see markets and how they perform for the